Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio program. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. It's just starting to get dark outside. It's a bit odd. We sit up here in the balcony and can look out on Bismarck's Main Street through a plate glass window. And when we started the show, there was sunshine and it looked like really nice weather, and it was strange because I'm used to being here and it's dark, so it'll be a different vibe for the show for the rest of the legislative session, thanks to daylight saving time. The second hour of the Legislature Today radio program is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We're going to have with us this evening Representative Pat Hattlestead. He's a Republican from Williston, up in the beating heart of the Bakken oil play in northwestern North Dakota. We also will have Williams County Commissioner Dan Kalile. We'll be speaking to him by phone, and also the mayor of Williston, Ward Kozer, who's serving his final term in that job. We'll be speaking to him by phone as well. First, I thought we'd speak about what the legislature did today. There was quite a focus on higher education today in the North Dakota legislature. Specifically, how do we get rid of the Board of Higher Education? There's a number of proposals to do that and replace the board with a number of different ownership structures. One, and these are all constitutional amendments, which would require not only the House and Senate to pass them, but the voters of North Dakota to approve these ideas if they were actually to take effect. So if you support the Board of Higher Education and want to keep it, don't be alarmed. There's nothing that's going to happen imminently. This is all just a process, and in the end, it will be decided by a vote of the people of North Dakota rather than the legislature itself. One of these amendments would elect a higher education commissioner and would abolish the Board of Higher Education. Another one would create a Department of Higher Education that would supervise the North Dakota University system, which has 11 colleges. There would be a 10-person board atop this department. The board would include the governor, and that group would hire a chancellor and supervise that person. We also would have, there's also an option, another constitutional amendment, to establish a higher education council of regents. The three top regents would be the governor, the Department of Public Instruction superintendent, and the agriculture commissioner. And there would also be 8 non-voting members of this council of regents, 6 of whom would be chosen by the legislature and another 2 by the governor. And this group would hire a top higher education administrator to supervise the North Dakota University system. And just so that we are aware that it isn't all beating up on higher education today, the governor testified on legislation that would revamp how the university system gets state aid to its individual institutions. Essentially, a group of finance experts at the schools, 4 of the colleges in the university system, got together and wrote a formula which which the legislature is deciding whether it wants to use that formula to decide how to allocate state aid amongst the institutions. And the bedrock of this formula is a calculation of how many student credit hours are completed at each institution. There are also formulas about how much each type of class, how much it costs to teach each type of class, how much to offer it. Also, there are adjustments to be made for whether the size of the campus of the institution and some other factors. And this would make the distribution of aid a fairly formulaic process, that sounds rather intricate and perhaps a bit boring, and frankly it is. But the job of dividing up taxpayer aid amongst North Dakota's colleges has been the subject of considerable to and fro in the legislature in recent years, and this formula, one of its objectives is to essentially get rid of that political back and forth about who gets what. If you would plug the aid into this formula, and it would spit out how much each institution got, and that would save time and bickering and political game playing. At least that's the objective. But our principal subject this evening is oil and gas development in northwestern North Dakota, or western North Dakota specifically. And we're going to be focusing tonight on Williams County and the challenges posed by oil and gas development. And again, we have Mr. Pat Hattlestead, a Republican from Williston, here with us. And he is with us at the behest of the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, which is our sponsor for this second hour of the legislature today. Welcome, Representative Hattlestead.
Thank you for having me.
And we wanted to speak, first of all, about House Bill 1358. Could you tell us what that bill does and why it's important?
Well, I think it's an extremely well thought out bill. It goes outside the box. It is a statewide piece of legislation, which is somewhat unique in that it's looking to deal with issues both in the western counties, which of course oil and traffic and the environmental issues and so forth, but it also deals with the problems faced in the east. So I'll give Representative Scarpel and a lot of the individuals that worked on the bill a lot of kudos because they did diversify the bill. We'd like to think that if it goes through the Senate as the House drafted it, it would be a perfect solution.
It's always a big if, though, isn't it?
Well, it is. Everybody has a little different perspective, and of course, it's the bill, if I can use the term, has been raised in the House. It involved about 17 oil and gas producing counties. Representatives and senators from all of those counties had a hand in drafting the piece of legislation with the magic stir stick of Representative Scarpel. But it goes beyond what you would normally think of an oil bill just dealing with the western oil counties. It diversifies and deals with issues across the state. So it's definitely thinking outside the box. From the oil-producing counties, it does a lot of really nice things for us. We get the kind of help that we think we need. Well, I guess we think more than think we need, and it tries to address some of that. It deals with 3 major hub cities, and that in turn then takes them out of several of the formulas and makes it a much more attractive situation for the smaller communities within those counties. Let's say where Williston is located, Dickinson, and Minot. Those 3 are taken out of the formula, and the smaller communities have a bigger piece of the pie. So it's a really well-crafted, well-designed, well-thought-out bill.
And how is it that this bill, basically what we're talking about is dividing up a portion of the oil production tax, if I'm correct, amongst cities and counties that need state help in order to deal with this oil boom that we're having? And how is that objective accomplished?
Well, I think by creating the hub cities where you have the major concentration of population and, of course, the center of a lot of the activities, we've made more money available to help deal with the infrastructure. At the same time, we recognize that the smaller communities in western North Dakota have also experienced a great deal of upheaval and turmoil and the need for infrastructure, and so they're going to get a bigger piece of the pie as well. So they say money can't solve all of the issues, but we need enough to keep the momentum going to deal with the infrastructure needs and then the related issues that come along with it. The bill deals with fire, with emergency medical personnel, with law enforcement. So it's a well-drafted, well-diversified bill, and everybody's getting some help.
Once this money is distributed, who decides how it's spent?
Well, I guess it would depend upon the counties, school districts, small cities. All of the individual groups that are going to get money will have an option to decide how it's going to be utilized. And of course, I think the shall we say, the leadership is pretty well established. A lot of very bright people working diligently to put plans together that have been working for quite a while. And so I think the framework is there. And now given the money and the opportunity to plan and then direct the direction that the communities are going to go.
I was just wondering, is there any sort of legislative oversight plan as to how this money is used and to prevent, I hate to use the term, but frivolous spending on frivolous projects?
Yeah, they're always written into, I think, every bill is legislative oversight. There are a number of state committees and commissions that have responsibilities to make sure that they are doing what is necessary. I think the state, I'm trying to think of the name of the board, but deals with the emergency medical personnel. They have a state board, and they have a major voice in the distribution and how it's going to be used. So there is oversight. It's not just here's a blank check and go. So we have a lot of very bright people that have worked and planned and strive to make the best possible direction and use of the money that they can. And from what I've seen and visited and talked to, I'm impressed. A lot of people thinking outside the box this time.
One of the subjects that we were talking about recently was whether or not North Dakota legislature should have more time to meet. And I think the subject is relevant here because we're dealing with some very large and intricate issues in terms of how money is distributed amongst affected counties affected by oil development. And this is just one of many examples of some of the things that are being brooded about in the legislature that involve a lot of money, that involve a lot of moving parts in terms of how it's distributed and how much is allocated. And I was wondering, do you have any sense that the proliferation of these types of complex problems has made it more acceptable to folks who maybe were not sympathetic to the idea of annual sessions to be more sympathetic to it?
Well, I would hope that there is that change in attitude, but we've been pushing it now for a couple sessions, and we've not been well received. A lot of people like it the way it is. They feel they're making a commitment, and they can't really do that 2 years in a row. Their business takes priority, and I don't object with that either. I guess my concern is that the financial situations change so dramatically in such a short period of time that I would like to see a 20-day session, 30-day session that dealt strictly with budget, strictly with finance, because we're asking people to plan probably at least 2 years out what the budget's going to be, and they've been planning. Maybe we could even say close to 3 years out. So you're working off a 3-year budget. Well, I'm lucky if I can get one 3 weeks out. So it puts a lot of pressure on the legislature to get a lot of things done in a short order. My concern is that sometimes we don't have enough time to sit back and reflect upon what we're doing. I sit on the Finance and Tax Committee, and boy, the bills just come at you fast and furious. And you'd like to sit down and put them all kind of on the kitchen table and take time to study where we're at. And sometimes that isn't possible. We have an excellent chairman and vice chair in Finance and Tax. They've been there a long time, and that helps. They have a track record, so they can say we've been there, we've done that. But let's take a look at this. So I think I would like to see a second session, a shorter time frame, because I think the financial issues are too overwhelming.
Isn't it also possible, frankly, that right now we're talking about enormous budget surpluses and how the money that the state treasury is collecting is so much more than it is or was expected to be 2 years ago when the legislature finished up. But frankly, things could go in the opposite direction. If oil prices were to crash, this would have its own consequences, which would be just as serious in the opposite direction. And you wouldn't, unless the governor called a special session, you wouldn't have any way to deal with it.
And I'm sure that's what would happen. If it crashed, we would be back in session right now, I think. We couldn't wait. We would have to react. It's a little bit like getting a stab wound or something. It's not a question of whether you're going to do something. You have to do it right now. And if it's on the other side of the fence where you have money and it's piling up, we're hoping that we put together a good budget. We're hoping that the agency heads that we put in charge of carrying out the plan do a good job. But if it went south real quick, we'd be back.
You used the term hub cities a moment ago. Can you tell me what that means in the context of this plan to distribute some oil tax money back to the local governments?
Well, right now we're looking at 3 cities in the west and perhaps 4 that have had a major impact as a result of the oil activity.
And which are they, please?
Williston, Dickinson, Minot, and we're also looking at Mandan with the oil refinery. Now I'm sure there are other communities also, but the idea is that we take those people out of the major formulas, set aside a certain amount of money for them, and then spread it out among the other smaller cities. So population, let's say Williston and Williams County tends to dominate population-wise, so under the most formulas, they get most of the money. So this way we can take Williston out of the formula and spread the money out, and same thing in Dickinson and Minot and Mandan.
We have on the telephone Mr. Dan Kalile, a Williams County Commissioner, and he obviously is concerned about, or following rather closely, the legislature's debates on how much of the oil tax revenue that the state government is swimming in at the present time is going to be redistributed to local governments. Welcome, sir. First of all, we've been having a debate on the pronunciation of your name. Could you pronounce your name for us, please?
It's Kalile, and certainly Mr. Hattlestead could straighten you out on it.
Oh, he did. He did.
Oh,
I was, the problem was that there used to be a guy that played shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals named Khalil Green, and for some reason I was thinking about that pronunciation, and I needed to be corrected.
Well, that would be the old country.
Okay.
And I don't know how it got maneuvered around to the Williston pronunciation, but Dale, I appreciate the chance to be on tonight, and a long time since you and I have had a chance to visit, and as they say, long-time listener, first-time caller.
Outstanding. Well, it's good to have you, sir. Could you just tell us what your sense is of what the legislature is doing at the present time in terms of, making provisions for providing the sort of aid that you need in the oil country to take care of the things that need to be taken care of?
Well, it appears, and I haven't been able to follow it as closely as I would like to, because I have another full-time job besides my full-time job at the county. And I haven't been able to spend as much time down there as I would like to, but it appears that they're doing everything they can to get adequate funding out to the western counties so that we can start to try and repair some of the damage and catch up a little bit and try to move ahead.
And can you tell us what is this money needed for? Just tell us, part of the panoply of things that need to be addressed here as a result of energy development.
Dale, every portion of the infrastructure in the West is completely overwhelmed and wore out, whether it's roads or county services, law enforcement, jail space. Everything is overwhelmed. Every system that we have is overwhelmed. We have our courthouse is so overcrowded that we've had situations where employees are sitting in hallways. We had a couple of employees start today, and it was quite. We reorganized one office to fit them into. So we went from one person in an office to 3, which is pretty common. But I was really surprised that there just wasn't a row of desks down the hallway.
How tough is it to keep those employees, sir?
It's gotten easier, and the applicants that we are getting are getting better all the time. We've had some just outstanding applicants, and because Williams County, like most of the counties, is a great place to work, we've been pretty fortunate to keep a lot of our employees, and we don't believe, Dale, in chasing employees with wages, because it's our wage system is a pretty complex thing. But we try to keep employees with good benefits, with a family-friendly atmosphere, with a good workplace, friendly and favorable work atmosphere. And there's a lot of mass humor in our building right now.
And do you see this activity reaching a peak? I mean, is it still continuing to grow like Topsy, or is it starting to slow down a bit to where it's perhaps more manageable than it was?
It's slowing down. It depends on which activity you want me to relate to. The oil activity is already coming down. And I've been saying for the last 2 years, Dale, that there would be 2 upward lines. One would be the oil activity, one would be the developmental activity. And they would cross at a certain point where the oil would start to level off, and that would reach a flat line, but the development phase would go right through it. And we're in that point right now.
We'll talk to you about the development phase that you just referred to, sir, after we come back from our break. We've been speaking to Williams County Commissioner Dan Kalile, and we also have with us at the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, we have Representative Pat Hattlestead, Republican from Williston, and we're talking about oil and gas challenges in northwestern and western North Dakota generally. And this hour is brought to you by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. We will be back shortly to continue our conversation with Representative Hattlestead and Mr. Kalile.
The Legislature Today is brought to you in part by Prairie Outpost Log Home.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today radio program. We're coming to you from the Bismarck, North Dakota Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in the downtown of Bismarck. And things are looking good down at the bar and restaurant. Folks are coming out to have a drink and a meal. And we're sitting in the balcony speaking to Representative Pat Hattlestead, Republican from Williston. And on the phone we have Williams County Commissioner Dan Kalile. And Mr. Kalile, could you please tell us what kind of sentiment you're picking up about whether the legislature should overhaul oil taxes, and whether the top rate on oil production, new oil production, should be reduced? I'm interested in your opinion on these subjects and the opinions that you're hearing from your constituents.
For lowering the extraction tax. As our city and our county has been impacted so greatly with all of the activity and all of the workers here, lowering the extraction tax in order to bolster the case for keeping the industry here is a real hard sell. Real hard sell. If that's a determining factor in them going down to Texas, I guess, they can go down to Texas is what I'm hearing on the street here.
So it's fair to say, sir, based upon what your read of the situation is that there's opposition up there to reducing the extraction tax.
Oh, there is. There's great opposition to it. When we look at what it's going to cost to rebuild western North Dakota, and one of the concerns that I hear people say is, are we just handling the money? Are we taking the extraction tax in, running it through the legislature, and going to turn around, right around and have to reinvest all of it back into western North Dakota at some time. You know, we valued our road system a couple of months ago. The replacement cost on the road system in Williams County is a little over $1 billion. What should we be spending to keep that investment up every year? 10%, 20% of $1 billion?
Representative Hattlestead, what is sort of feedback are you getting from your constituents about whether or not the oil tax in North Dakota should be overhauled and the top rate reduced?
Well, I think as Mr. Kalal talks about, there's a lot of discussion out there. We get probably a bounce from each side depending upon what's your position in the industry. We see a lot of people that say don't lower the tax at all until we get everything taken care of, which I think is what Mr. Kalal said. Then we take a look at the other side of the fence that says we have all these exemptions, we have all these categories, and basically when everything is put together, our oil tax on average is about 10.8%. So then you have those people that say, okay, let's eliminate all the exemptions, let's eliminate all the triggers, put everything aside and look at what the tax would be, which is just under 11%. So I think if you got everybody together and you got all of the facts laid out on the table, and if we could take emotion out of it, which of course that's not going to happen, we could perhaps find some common ground. Now, I think when we talk about incentives to keep the oil in western North Dakota, to keep them drilling in western North Dakota, one oil person, and again, one person, one opinion, but he says as long as there's a good price, we're not going anywhere. We're having tremendous success up here. It's costing us money, no doubt about that, but as long as the price remains up, we'll stay here. So you got the balance. And I agree with Mr. Kalal, we've got tremendous road work to do, infrastructure to do. When you look back, those roads were built for a 1-ton farm truck. There are no 1-ton farm trucks anywhere. There isn't a 1-ton truck, I don't think, anywhere. So they have, and I'll give Mr. Kalal and his group a tremendous amount of credit. They're trying to keep everything usable and every which way they can. So they need money, they need resources, and I think if we could show and the industry could show that money, that you're not going to lose resources, that you're not going to lose money, that you're going to have the resources to rebuild, then the possibility, maybe 0.5% from 11.5 to 11 would be a possibility. But we're hearing a lot of individuals, both sides of the coin, from don't you dare do it to, well, let's take a look and see.
One of the things at play here, and we'll kind of tiptoe into it a bit, is that this is one of the issues in the legislature that is a partisan issue. The Democrats in the House and Senate, who are, frankly, they make up 1/3 of the legislature, so their influence is somewhat limited. But they have staked the claim that the concerns of the oil industry about whether triggers would be applied, and also that there's a certain type of loophole that needs to be closed that allows high-producing wells to benefit from the same tax rate as lower-producing what are called stripper wells. They maintain that these issues can be handled without bringing down the top tax rate. And the legislation that we have alive in the legislature right now kind of melds all of these issues into one bill, and the Democratic position has been that you can take care of these issues separately if need be. There's no reason to have like an omnibus oil bill where you essentially trade oil industry concessions, if you could call them that, for a lower tax rate in the long term. And what my question is to what extent are politics driving this debate? Some sort of apprehension among Republicans that this is an issue that can be exploited by the Democrats in the next election, that they can say, look, we have high oil prices, we're rolling in oil money, and these Republicans want to cut taxes for the oil industry when we have all of these needs out there.
Well, I think the oil taxes now are paying a tremendous number of the state's bills. My concern is that we're going to become overly dependent upon that oil resource to the point where we don't either conserve our spending or redirect our spending. The nice thing about having the Democrats, we sit and visit. I mean, these are people, we get along as much as sometimes you see in the paper you'd think we really hated each other. We don't. We're very much interested in doing what is best for the people of North Dakota. If we sit down and if we find out that the doing away with a small part of the oil tax in the end will accomplish what we want, which is best for the people of North Dakota, then that will be a course of action that we might take. If we find out that that's not going to work, that we can't do what we think we want to be able to do, then I think we'll back off. So we're, as a political party and as individuals, we're not going to do something that's stupid, that's going to harm the industry or the people of the state of North Dakota. We're not going to kill the golden goose, but at the same time, we're not going to let the goose run wild either. So we're hoping that we can find some place in the middle or some place that would be, that will use common sense, and the end result will be what is best for the people.
Mr. Kalile, in your position as a Williams County Commissioner, is this the sort of, does this factor, frankly, have any influence in people's opinions, whether they're Republican or Democrat, or whether this is an issue that can be used to help Democrats gain more power in the legislature by essentially saying that the Republicans are doing something that's not necessary because they're pandering to oil companies? Is that part of the calculus here up where you sit, or is it something else?
Dale, the discussions that I've heard haven't gone into it as deeply as what you just explored with Representative Hadley, who did a really nice job of laying it out. And it's less of a party issue than more of a what's best for the state of North Dakota issue. And I'm glad that Pat said that, because you don't hear that enough down in Bismarck. You don't hear enough people stand up and say, this is the best thing for the state, so let's do this.
We also have with us the mayor of Williston, Mr. Ward Kozer. He is good evening, sir. Could you give us some? Have you been listening to the conversation about the political aspects of the debate over oil taxation?
Yes, for the last couple of minutes I have.
To what extent do you think that influences the debate in Williston and the surrounding area about whether oil taxes should be reduced?
Well, I liked Dan Kalile's comments, and this really shouldn't be a political issue. It should be an issue of what's right for the state. And I wouldn't doubt that it's being politicized a little bit, but I hope not a whole lot. As we look at this, and I wasn't in all the conversation, but we have a lot of needs out here, and my first concern has always been to make sure that those needs are taken care of. Secondly, then, I guess if we're overtaxing an industry, we need to address that. But it's hard for me to imagine that we're ever going to get as many resources redirected here to deal with all the issues that we have. And so I know 2 years ago I was certainly opposed to the proposal they had to cut the taxes. This time I haven't actually studied it as much, but I still think the first issue needs to be that we make sure that the needs, the infrastructure needs in the region are taken care of.
Mayor Kozer, you used the word overtaxing. Do you believe, sir, personally, that the oil industry in North Dakota is overtaxed?
My initial reaction would be no. I mean, I'm not the expert in it, and I don't have all the facts and figures from the other states around, as to what they tax and whatever. But my sense is not that's not the case.
Well, to what extent? I guess a lot of the people I talk to, they judge it by oil activity, and they figure if there's booming oil activity and companies are coming here and wanting to explore and hire folks, that the taxes can't be all bad, or else they wouldn't be here.
Right, and I think that's true. I guess the only thing that I would say is I was here in the 80s when we went through a boom and then a bust, and things changed very rapidly. And obviously with the session, with the legislature meeting only every other year, if something should change in the economy with the price of oil and different things along that line, I guess I question if the legislature would be able to adjust in such a timely manner as they would need to.
Mayor Kozer, is the circumstance that you just referred to in the 80s when oil prices went down, and of course there was also the original approval of the oil extraction tax in 1980. Are you afraid of a repeat of this?
No, I'm not afraid. From that perspective, I don't. I guess I just recognize. I wasn't in government in the 80s, but I was in business in the 80s and trying to be in business, and I recognize. Booms happen fast, but busts happen a lot faster. And although we hear a lot of positive things that would make us believe, and I do myself believe that the oil activity is going to be here for quite some time. I recognize the oil industry has always been cyclical, and there are no guarantees in it. And so I think we need to keep that in the back of our mind. We need to take care of the needs today, and we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place for the future, recognizing that things can change. I don't mean to be a naysayer or a doom and gloom type person in any way, shape, or form. I would tend to believe it's going to stay very positive, but I just recognize and believe that there are no guarantees in this industry.
Mayor Kozer, are you satisfied so far with what you've seen of the legislature attempting to get communities like Williston and other communities in the oil country the sorts of resources they need to deal with the effects of oil development?
Well, I would say that, more is being done in this session than's ever been done, from Williston's perspective anyway. Is there enough? I guess that would be a question. We're looking in what we call the Scarpa Bill 1358 at getting about $30 million a year for infrastructure needs. That would be $60 million in the biennium. In the next biennium, we have infrastructure needs of about $255 million. So obviously, we aren't going to be able to take care of all that. We'll do what we can with other sources of revenue and sales tax and whatever. But if it was 3 times what it is, I would be happier. But I do give them credit. I think this is the first time I've really seen them look at a community, especially what we call the hub cities, and say, what are your impacts? As you're out there and you're going to provide, for an example, sewage treatment for not only your city but those around you, what kind of support do we need to give you as a state?
Mayor Kozer, you mentioned the figure $255 million. If you had that money in hand, sir, what would it be spent on?
Well, there's about $100 million we have in what we call roads and transportation needs within the city. Some of that includes bypass through town and some other infrastructure road, putting out main roads to areas of development. There would be probably about $40 million, I think, that would go to the wastewater treatment facility that we're having under construction. We need about 30-some million in stormwater, $6 million in solid waste. It would be broken down into different categories, but it comes out to about $255 million.
One of the things that you mentioned the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. One of the issues that is affecting northwestern North Dakota in the legislature is the Western Area Water Supply Project, and there are some proposals to essentially put some restrictions on what that particular project may do. I wanted to ask you and Mr. Kalile and Representative Hattelstead what your views are on that subject because, frankly, you have a faction of folks that think that the Western Area Water Supply Project, while it's well-intentioned in terms of its goal of supplying water to cities and communities, is kind of running amok in terms of trying to supply industrial water and compete with private water providers. And I wanted to know what your opinion was of these issues.
Okay, well, I should be happy to tell you that I actually serve on the board for what we call WAS. You have about $100 million worth of water that gets sold into the oil industry a year at this particular point. And when WAS was set up 2 years ago, the legislature did something that they've never done before. Normally on major water projects, they give a grant of maybe 60%, and then they let you borrow the rest. But in this particular case, they said, let's do this. We'll let you borrow the whole amount. First phase was $110 million. Then let's go to $150 million in this session. And we'll let you come up with that money by selling water to the oil industry. And so we need, about $25 million a year to make those payments on those loans. And so there's been some concern on the WAS part that as we have more and more development of private developers, and we certainly have no problem with the mom and pops, the guys who are, trying to make a living on the $75 million that would be left out there. But we just are somewhat concerned that as the state gives more and more permits for water, we're going to have a large quantity of water being sold. You have a fixed need. The oil industry, takes this much water and doesn't look like they're going to be increasing that amount. And as you have more water and less demand, you're going to drive the price down. And so the oil industry, I'm afraid, will get water very inexpensively, which then would mean that the private individuals, the guy living in Ray or Watford City, would have to pay more for their water to pay this bill. And so that's where you've come up with this issue that's been somewhat contentious, and, we have to find a solution that we can all live with.
Mr. Carlisle, what is your own opinion about, there are proposals in the legislature to essentially restrict what the Western Area Water Supply Project may do as it continues to develop, and I wanted to know what your opinion was of this, I guess I'll call it a trend, although I'm not sure if it is one.
I'm very disappointed that the legislature has been hijacked by the water issues this session, Dale. Very disappointed. And although the county was not happy with the way that WAS started out, we're certainly behind it. We're certainly in favor of it because the mission of WAS, fundamentally, to provide drinking water, is very important. And to provide water into McKenzie County is very important because McKenzie County is chronically short on drinking water. But I want to ask you a question. When you talk about the private water guys, there is no such thing as private water guys. What we have is a state-sponsored drinking water system trying to finance itself selling water versus a state-supplied private water system that is trying to sell the water to the industry that the state is giving them. So it's very frustrating to sit up here and watch this go back and forth when nobody except a few people up here ask the question, whose water are they selling?
Sorry, go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Well, there's two things that are really troublesome. We have a choice between water out of the Missouri River, where every 8 seconds a frac job goes by under the Lewis and Clark Bridge, or we can take glacial water out of the aquifer for a one-time use, and some future generation is going to curse us for taking that glacial water and pumping it down an oil well. We have the Missouri River running by here. And it's very frustrating that the state, we just talked about oil taxes. We're taxing oil that belongs to the mineral owner at 11.5%. But the water that the industrial water users are able to pull out of the ground on their former irrigation permits or their agricultural permits is free of charge to them. And that water belongs to every person in the state of North Dakota. That is not right.
Yeah, the question becomes, sir, how does one reconcile these two things? I mean, you mentioned that you have, the WAS project, which is, you have How do you reconcile these two competing factions?
Well, before this, when this first got rolling, there was a meeting up here, and we're going to run out of time, but there was a meeting up here with Governor Hogan. And it was 3 or 4 working groups: water, housing, all kinds of roads. And I was in on the water discussion. And the plan that Governor Hogan was pursuing was, we'll let the irrigators sell water until we get a river water system online, and then we'll only use river water because we're going to protect the groundwater. And that never came to fruition. You know, the WA system is moving ahead, but in the meantime, the independent water users are down there trying to scuttle it. We need to use the river water.
What do you think about this, Representative Hattleston? I'm sure I can see you're burning to talk about it.
This is kind of a no-win situation, but we need cooler heads to get together and find a solution to the issue. I think without a doubt Western North Dakota needs clean, potable water. No question at all. WAS is going to provide that. The industry needs a great deal of water, and the independent water users can do that to a degree. But I think both sides need to get together. I think if we can do like Lyndon Johnson once did, he took, I think, railroad employees and owners and stuck them in a room and said, you're not getting out of here until you come up with a solution. So
I'm afraid we're going to have to get out of here in a short period of time. The gentleman you just heard is Representative Pat Hattlestead. He's a Republican from Williston. We've also had on the phone Williams County Commissioner Dan Kalile and Williston Mayor Ward Kosher. Thank you, gentlemen, for being on. And our hour is sponsored by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties. Thank you.
America's Mattress Grand Opening. All Serta mattresses half price. Let's get the matching box spring free while supplies last. Come celebrate our grand opening at our new concept store in front of North Walmart. America's Mattress. Bismarck.
Look how sad your smartphone is, because it does